Cities don't usually change the way people picture them changing. Most of us imagine decline as something sudden and dramatic. A day when the streets go quiet, stores stay shuttered, and the hum of life finally gives way to stillness. A clear, sharp break between before and after, a point where something has obviously gone wrong. But cities almost never lose their footing in that dramatic way. What vanishes first is far quieter, far more subtle. And almost no one notices it while it's happening, or for a long time after. Neighborhoods still wake up every morning the same way. Cars ease out of driveways in the soft gray light, engines murmuring low and steady. Headlights sweep across familiar lawns, cutting through the last traces of night fog that clings to the grass. Traffic builds gradually, a predictable tide moving along routes worn smooth by years of repetition. Intersections pulse red and green in steady cycles, brief pauses before the flow resumes without disruption. Shops lift their shutters, lights turning on one by one, warm against the cool morning air, faint scent of fresh coffee drifting out. Customers step inside at an unhurried pace, footsteps echoing softly on tile floors that have seen generations of feet. People linger at shelves, fingers brushing over packages, eyes scanning labels with quiet focus. Checkout lines form naturally, quiet exchanges drifting across counters, voices low and familiar. Small talk fills the space, comments about the weather turning colder, the weekend game, the new cafe down the block. Homes glow as evening arrives. Windows turn golden against the fading sky. Families gather around kitchen tables, voices overlapping, plates clinking gently, the smell of home cooking filling the rooms. Warm light spills onto porches and sidewalks as darkness settles in, soft shadows stretching long across the pavement. Televisions flicker behind curtains, evening programs playing at a familiar, comfortable volume. Parks remain active on weekends. Joggers pass early, breathing hard in crisp air, picnics spread out later in the day under trees. Children chase each other across grass, swings creaking in steady rhythm, slides echoing with high-pitched joy. Dogs bound freely while owners call them back with practiced ease, leashes swinging loose. Paths fill with walkers, alone or in pairs, air cool and crisp, leaves crunching softly underfoot. Benches hold readers lost in pages, couples sharing quiet words or families catching their breath after play. From the outside, everything feels intact. Routines interlock smoothly. Days blend into one another without interruption. Nothing appears different from last year or the year before that. The same steady cadence continues, reinforcing the sense that things are still holding. At first glance, nothing seems wrong. That's the trap. People expect the first sign of trouble to announce itself clearly. Something visible enough to interrupt routine, something obvious enough to demand attention. A moment where everyday life feels unmistakably different than before. But long-term change almost never introduces itself that way. It does not arrive with a clear visual marker. It does not interrupt daily schedules. It does not force an immediate conversation. The early signals are quieter than that. They appear inside systems that still look functional from the outside. Inside routines that continue without disruption. Inside institutions that remain open, staffed, and operational. What changes first is not what people see. It is what stops renewing beneath the surface. Replacement slows without drawing attention. Transitions stretch out quietly. What leaves is no longer matched at the same pace by what arrives. This shift is almost invisible because it happens inside averages. Population numbers still look stable on paper. Employment still looks healthy in broad statistics. Tax revenue still appears sufficient in quarterly reports. But underneath those aggregates, the structure changes. Fewer young households arrive to offset aging ones. Fewer children replace graduating classes year after year. Fewer first-time buyers replace long-term owners at the same rate. Fewer new workers plant roots that tie them to the local economy for decades. The system still functions, but with less elasticity. That loss of elasticity matters more than most people realize. Cities are built on replacement cycles. They assume turnover. They assume renewal. They assume that every departure is eventually balanced by an arrival. Schools plan based on projected enrollment, not just current attendance. Infrastructure assumes a certain number of new users each year. Local businesses rely on first-time customers, not just regulars. Municipal budgets are built on expectations of continuity, not contraction. When momentum slows, those assumptions weaken quietly. Not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough to cause hesitation. Projects get delayed, expansions become smaller, hiring slows without announcements. Long-term investments are postponed rather than canceled. No one calls this decline. They call it caution. And caution spreads faster than collapse. Once institutions begin acting defensively, the system tightens, risk tolerance drops, planning horizons shorten, decisions that once felt safe now feel uncertain. This is how cities begin operating in maintenance mode. They stop asking what they could become. They focus on holding what they already have. Individual decisions accumulate in private. Remote work expands options gradually. Costs rise without triggering immediate crisis. Family conversations change tone over time. Long-term plans are reconsidered quietly, often late at night. One household researches alternatives over months. Another weighs trade-offs in careful detail. A third decides the future here feels less certain than it once did. These decisions are rarely emotional. They are practical. They are defensive. They are framed as flexibility, not escape. We can always come back. We're just trying something different. We're keeping our options open. But return rates are far lower than people expect. Once households re-anchor elsewhere, socially, professionally, educationally, inertia works in the opposite direction. Children start new schools. Careers align locally. Social circles reform. Momentum is hard to rebuild once it leaves. There is no sudden exodus, no coordinated movement, no visible gaps at first, just a subtle change in trajectory. This is where assumptions stop working. Human perception is tuned to sudden absence. An empty parking lot on a weekday stands out. A long-standing business closing registers immediately. A playground unusually quiet sparks concern. But gradual thinning doesn't trigger alarms. It blends into routine. It hides inside averages and expectations. It disguises itself as normal variation. Momentum fades long before emptiness appears. The data confirms this pattern quietly. Census Bureau Vintage 2025 estimates show overall U.S. population growth at roughly 0.8 to 1%, driven mainly by international migration and modest natural increase. Domestic movement remains directional. High-cost coastal states like California, New York, and Illinois continue to see net outflows of 150 to 250,000 residents per year toward lower-cost regions. Southern and interior states still gain population, but growth rates have slowed to 1 to 2% in many metros after peaking much higher during the pandemic years. School enrollment patterns echo the shift early. National enrollment stabilizes around 49 to 50 million students. Regional data shows flattened growth or 1 to 3% declines in select districts across coastal, Midwestern, and interior regions. Housing markets reflect similar moderation. Days on market extend gradually in certain areas without sharp crashes. Search behavior shifts quietly. Outbound moving patterns rise steadily rather than spiking. Across regions, the story is consistent. Coastal metros remain active. Downtowns stay busy. Hybrid work, tourism, and cultural events keep streets full. Legacy cities in the Midwest and Northeast continue functioning normally. Parks are maintained. Shops stay open. Community traditions persist even as demographics age. Sunbelt gainers still grow, but more slowly. Construction continues. Schools remain open. Yet long-term residents quietly reassess costs, insurance, and sustainability. No region shows empty streets as the starting point of decline. Change begins beneath the surface, layer by layer. Over years, not months. The cumulative effects emerge later. In school funding, in service planning, in infrastructure decisions, in who stays long enough to invest in the future. By the time the shift becomes visible, momentum has already moved elsewhere. This is why cities don't lose people first. They lose momentum. Earlier in this series, we explored how cities begin to change long before decline becomes visible. Not through crises, but through slow shifts in momentum. In the next part of this series, we look at what happens when renewal slows and why families are often the first signal of deeper change. This is Urban Bird.